Good morning, comrades. You're listening to WHIV-LP New Orleans 102.3. This is your weekly Good Morning Comrade. Jeff here on the show. We have a very special guest today. We have Ashik Siddique, who is one of the national co-chairs of the Democratic Socialists of America. He is via satellite. I just remember when people said that when I was younger. Coming from Delaware. Delaware. Jesus.
the other one.
Wilmington, North Carolina. I don't know why. I just like Biden myself in the brain.
Common mistake.
Ashik, what's going on, brother?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so you are one of the national co-chairs, as I just said, of Democratic Socialists of America. You've also written a couple of articles over the past few months over the sort of like role of DSA, and these are sort of things we're going to be talking about, the role of DSA in this sort of like new sort of very scary landscape. And then also as a sort of a tee up for that, I mean, everybody who's paying any kind of attention to any kind of national politics can just see that right now the right wing, who has seized control of both houses of the Congress and presidency with very slim margins in both houses of Congress, by the way, historically slim, but they're just able to do whatever they want. And the Democrats at this case have essentially just abdicated any and all opposition responsibilities and have decided that, like, hey, they can just do anything that we want, which is wild, because I remember when Joe Biden was the president not that long ago, and anytime anybody ever went up to him about anything and said we need student loans forgiven for something like that, he just would like turn up his hands and be like, I don't know, I can't do nothing, I'm just a small bean president. So I guess like that's sort of like a long wind up to sort of like set up where this conversation is going to go. But I don't know, do you want to sort of just kind of kick a little bit of that off?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this is now not even the second month of Trump being in office for the second time. And a few weeks after the inauguration, we're seeing already just really like a lot of alarming things happening very quickly. Just this week, there's really direct frontal attacks happening on the federal government, on federal workers. Elon Musk is clearly just running whole parts of the government. Trump is, making some moves, like he wants to run the Kennedy Center to do like arts management or whatever, while clearly handing over, major functions of the government to people who have no business being there. Like nobody elected Elon Musk. Just all these corporate handouts are happening to dismantle what the government should be doing way more of for the people. Like all these like meager things that have been built up for decades that still do help support millions of people across the country are just being attacked very directly. So this is really bad. And we're seeing very little resistance from Democrats. There's just a lot of, throwing their hands up and saying, there's only so much we can do. We've just got to follow the processes or whatever. The implication is like, we'll come back to vote again in 2 years or 4 years. And this is just like, so like even weaker than what we've heard for many decades from Democrats, where at least there was some semblance of resistance whenever Republicans have been in government. So now it's even more pathetic, and it just underlines the reasons why we're here in the first place, like why Democrats lost so astoundingly in November. Like Donald Trump didn't increase his vote share by that much, like a couple of million, but Kamala Harris got millions less than Biden had in 2020. And this is really the substance of like what I published in this article in Newsweek that came out earlier this week. There's a lot of blame going around from Democratic pundits and consultants, like people who have no business like having these jobs at this point. Like they've lost elections repeatedly.
They're paid to lose. They're paid and proven
Totally.
losers.
Yeah, it's just it's so ridiculous. Like they're so demonstrably out of touch with many millions of people who used to be part of the reliable Democratic voting base. And the bottom is just falling out of what the base has been for the Democratic Party. Like that's the biggest theme of the past year and really for decades, like working class de-alignment from the Democratic Party. Just there are millions of people in this country, increasingly like racial, like minor, like all these demographics that Democrats have taken for granted, like people of color, like Black, Latino immigrants, like many people are just fed up. They don't see anything. Some people are actually voting for Trump, but many more people are just not voting at all because they don't see what's in it for them. So the people who are responsible for this, they're just indicating that it's time to stand down. Like Hakeem Jeffries recently, who's the minority leader of Democrats, is just saying like, "Oh, we don't have leverage." And
anything. We just can't do anything.
Yeah, and it's just really pathetic. So this is this is a moment where when the Democrats just continue to fail to do what they should be doing as an opposition party that people assume they should be doing, they just are not, and it's a time to really demonstrate how we are building the alternative. Like somebody has to, and DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, like we're one of the organizations that's really been throwing down for years and building an alternative that increasingly is so sometimes it's almost shocking how much it seems like some DSA chapters are just the only ones who seem to be presenting any kind of alternative right now. Like in the past few weeks that trans kids have been under attack. This has been one of the like throughout the election for the past year, like some of the communities that have been most scapegoated by Republicans have been trans people and immigrants. So on those two fronts, Democrats have especially just been enabling these attacks or not mounting any kind of resistance, just almost reinforcing some of the arguments made about it.
Also, like trolling, like you would see all the time, these Democrats, these high-profile Democrats who never gave a damn about the bombing that's been going on for the past year and nearly a half in Palestine, who are all of a sudden like, wow, look at what Trump is doing over in Palestine. He's going to sell it like it's real estate property. It's like, okay, how is that any different than what has been going on previously? I mean, even temporarily, the violence has been kind of put down a little bit just because of some deals that have been made, I suppose. But like, I'm not to say Trump is better in any way, but like this idea that the Democrat or these specific people cared about any of this stuff suddenly do, only for the purpose of saying, well, this is why you should have voted for Kamala Harris.
Right. And they just have no standing to say that. And it's just, and again, there's no alternative proposed. They're not fighting for a real alternative. It's almost like with Gaza. It's almost like they want to rub it in. Like, oh, you voters who stayed home because you care about Palestine, this is your fault that Trump is talking about selling Gaza to like real estate developers or whatever.
It reminds me of 2016 when there were floods in North Carolina, where there were high-profile Democrats on national television who would say, "Oh, well, I guess North Carolinians deserve it because they voted for Trump." It's like, what are you doing, bro? Like, seriously, like, who are you representing? Like, what is going on here?
It's just so elitist. It's so out of touch, and it's like so. One of the examples right now is like all these major hospitals. Are starting to revoke care for trans kids, like gender affirming care, and letting this like almost preemptively to comply with federal policies, or I forget what, even so many things have happened in the past few weeks that I forget what actual executive orders about this have passed or not. But a bunch of major hospitals like NYU, Langone, well, I forgot how to say it exactly. But a bunch of major hospitals have started doing this. So DSA chapters, picking up on this, immediately started scheduling protests. New York City DSA got thousands of people out on the streets, like within 2 days of calling this. Chicago, LA, a bunch of chapters are specifically going after hospitals that are doing this, and some of them are actually changing their policy or just like backsliding. Not backsliding, but saying like, okay, we're not going to push this through right now. So these are the kinds of things where no other organization is able to show up as immediately or at scale to stand up for trans kids right now. So that's something where, if Democratic leaders wanted to really show that they care about parts of their potential or supposed base that are being under attack right now, they could be doing things, and they're just not. And as socialists, like, we understand what is really behind a lot of these things systemically. Like, capitalists want to divide and conquer different communities and scapegoat some people so that they can, polarize. And that's what the attack on trans people is all about. Just like using this, like, gender panic, like all these things to just distract a lot of people from what is actually causing problems in their lives, who are capitalists.
Yeah.
Like somebody like Elon Musk is driving all these systemic things that are, making cost of living go up, that are giving people less power at work. They're getting paid less. Rent is going up. Just services are getting worse across the board. And who's to blame? Is it, trans kids who compete in sports, or is it the people who are actually controlling the economy?
Right.
So these are the kinds of things that, as a socialist organization, as a working class organization, we really have to figure out, like, how to reframe a lot of these things, and like show that we're going to stand up for people who are being scapegoated, and also organize for the alternative that is going to prevent, just everything getting worse for most people, while a few at the top just do better and better.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to like I don't want to undersell like all of the work that DSA is doing, and we can get into some of the specifics of that going forward, but like the level by which these Democrats have abdicated their responsibility. Like, if you remember any time in the past since 2010 or something like that, anytime there was ever a like debt ceiling fight or a budget bill or all these fiscal cliffs or whatever, the Republicans would always seize on those opportunities to essentially get some of their agenda through must pass legislation, like in the Congress, right? And you see these Democrats like Chuck Schumer saying like, oh, we're not even going to bring it up. We're not even going to try anything. While, like we said before, we have these historically narrow like majorities in the House and in the Senate. It's one of these sorts of things that almost feels like it's designed to, I mean, we have on this show, like, we've said Weimar comparisons over and over again for way too many times, but like in like to be a little bit more like concurrent with these issues, like this is something where you see the, like, this isn't even Nero fiddling while Rome burns. This is like this is like bowing your head and just like watching, like opening the gates for the barbarians into the walls. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that are really surfacing to people's consciousness now, just like seeing what Elon Musk and people in the Trump administration are doing, and just, uncovering things that have been kind of under the surface all along, like Elon Musk's history in apartheid South Africa, just like the fact that he and his whole family come from, this lineage of people who are just like actively like, what is it exactly? Like, his grandfather, I think, moved to South Africa in the 1950s as the white apartheid regime was being reinforced. Like, it wasn't that there were already, South Africans who were part of the like colonial era. They moved to there from like Canada or something, because they were like, this sounds cool. Like, this sounds like an exciting new society to be part of.
Just
and then
open
he
up
left.
your mind and enslave black folks.
Right, and they left in 1994. Coincidence? What happened in South Africa then? So it's just wild how a bunch of these people just have roots in, one of the most explicitly racist societies of the 20th century, and yeah, somehow this was not part of the popular imagination of Elon Musk and how he branded publicly, but now it's just coming right to the surface because it's just mask off.
Do you think that there is an opportunity at this moment, because the sort of like it's like an opportunity, but it's not a clear opportunity, because you can see like literal, like the top like 5 class enemies standing right behind Donald Trump at his inauguration. You see Elon Musk and like Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg and all these freaks just like standing together and being like, it's us against the working class, essentially.
I mean, yeah, in some ways you couldn't ask for better, better images,
pretty clear, aren't they?
Yeah, to show people. I mean, it's just clearer than ever. Like, when Democrats have been in power, sometimes there's this mask of okay, we're gonna use certain kinds of symbols or language, or
get Mark Cuban to go like be the nice billionaire.
Right. And now it's just totally mask off. And I think yeah, in some ways it makes things clearer. I think it's I don't want to minimize, like I'm not an accelerationist, like I do believe it's always important to try to organize for as much as we can, like fight and win. And now in some ways it is more stark. Like they are just pushing through a lot. Like there are some critical fights like in the next few weeks to defend federal workers. I'm hearing people compared to the PATCO, like what Reagan did in the 1980s. So I think there are things that we just have to organize for and fight and see what's possible. That people talk about things being canaries in the coal mine for like what can indicate how what terrain we're organizing on. So I think we shouldn't at all minimize this or just assume like, oh, things can get worse and then people will rise up.
No, that's
like
ridiculous.
like I've seen or learned about enough examples of that not being the case. Like people do just have a lot of capacity to tolerate horrible conditions, and I think it's always, we can never be passive or complacent. It's always on us, as socialists, as people trying to build organization, to organize for as much as we can, keep building our power and our institutional capacity to do things. And those are things that are under attack right now. Like there are things that like right out the gate before they even got elected, things were coming up, like this nonprofit killer bill to target organizations that have tax exempt nonprofit status. So an organization like DSA, for example, like, we are technically a nonprofit organization. We have our own resources and things. These are things that are under attack. And I think in plenty of ways, DSA could potentially be more resilient to it. Like we're based on membership dues. Like that means, people who just pay dues to DSA help make up our resource base. So we don't get big grants. We're not beholden to individual rich people like a lot of nonprofits are. We don't get government funding. So a lot of nonprofit orgs, for example, like advocacy groups, get government funding, and that's being stripped away. So that's a problem for a lot of issue-based organizing groups. In some ways, DSA could be more resilient to that, but this is just something that they're very systematically using to go after people that they think are political threats, like people who organize for Palestine. These are organizations that are directly in their sight lines. So I think we can't concede any ground, but we have to be able to organize in ways that figure out how to defend what we have and then go on the offense and figure out where they're vulnerable. And that's where always, as socialists, as people trying to build working class organization, we have potentially huge numbers, even when they have a huge amount of money, but we have to figure out how to organize that in a sustained way. And that means being very, focused and disciplined about where we try to intervene and how. And that's something that is really challenging right now. Like I hear from people across the board, like, what do we do? Like so much is coming out, like dozens of executive orders are happening in just these first few weeks. And it just feels very confusing and, hard to figure out how to organize. And that's where, because we have so many members, because we have structures in place for collective decision-making, there are chapters that have been able to respond pretty quickly and decisively in ways that I think are really important. And we just have to keep building on that.
You're listening to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. Ashik Siddique joining us on the program. Ashik is one of the co-chairs of the Democratic Socialists of America, national co-chair, I should say. We're talking a little bit about sort of the ways that the sort of crisis that we're currently in with the sort of, I wouldn't even call it a machete. There's just like a meat cleaver, just cutting off portions of the government and the public services that the working class have earned over the years, and ways that organizations like DSA are fighting back. So I guess the next question I would sort of say is, like, we've seen in 2016 and like after Trump the first time, there was a boost in membership. And that's something that did sort of like come in. There was not as much infrastructure as there currently is as an organization then as there is now at the times when it comes to maintaining that kind of membership, to have people who are interested in maybe going to their first, organizational, event or protest or meeting for the first time. How do you as you know, I'm not asking you like it's a $64 question, but how do we as an organization, how does DSA as an organization, I'm a member myself, how do we as an organization sort of systematize that way to sort of keep as many folks involved and continue to grow while these crises are happening, because those things are sapping capacity as well and putting people in really, really terrible situations.
Yeah, that's a great big question. And I've been thinking
how do you do organizing, Ashik? How do you do it? How do you organize the whole working class in the middle of a crisis?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot for the past year, like even before the election results were called, about what, in thinking about what a next Trump administration could be like. I was thinking a lot about what the first one was like. Mm-hmm. I myself joined DSA in early 2017. Like, I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I had supported Bernie Sanders in 2016. So after that, during the general election, after Trump won, it was shocking to a lot of people, but I wasn't really surprised, because a big motivating factor of a lot of people who supported Bernie in 2016 was just the confidence that, what he represented was the best way to defeat what Trump represented.
Totally.
Just a mass movement of millions of people for very clear, transformative changes to working class people's lives that could just raise expectations about what's possible from government. That was incredibly motivating to millions of people. And then the Democratic Party squashed it to choose somebody like Hillary Clinton instead, who represented just the same old, triangulation, who represented what enabled Trump to win. So when that happened, I was in Washington, D.C. and just thinking like, okay, well, I guess I'm a socialist now because I supported Bernie. What does that mean? What do I do? And DSA was an organization showing up at protests and just very visible on the ground in those first few weeks. So I joined, and that very quickly became my organizing home. Like, it felt like, something that was really building forward from what Bernie's campaign represented. And then, through those years from 2017 to 2020, there were just all these movement moments like Black Lives Matter, what else was happening? There was a women's march like right off the bat in January 2017. I remember for the first 6 months of 2017, every weekend there was another huge march on DC or rally that had tens of thousands of people.
The Muslim ban, remember the Muslim ban? How
yeah, absolutely. Right. There are all these huge moments that got, many thousands, millions of people out on the streets, like protesting and just, who were just fed up and like realized that institutionally nothing was going to change unless many people were willing to demonstrate somehow. So these movement moments happened, like the pandemic, obviously, and that a lot of those surges of energy were a part of what allowed Biden to get elected in 2020. It just demonstrated such widespread, discontent with Trump and how they were mishandling things like the pandemic. But it also showed that millions of people demanded more. And Biden, like, part of what allowed him to win was this whole Democratic primary field shifting to the left because of the effect of Bernie Sanders. Like, there were all these, like, Kamala Harris was saying she supported populist policies like Medicare for all or a Green New Deal, like worker protections. These things happened. And then again, when the Democratic Party consolidated behind Biden to stop Bernie Sanders, they still felt, pressure to rhetorically say leftish things, and that's part of how millions of people turned out to get him elected. But then they squandered that over the course of 4 years. So with all that said, I've been thinking about what makes this period different versus January 2017, and one of the things is that there is more organization. Like in 2017, like DSA grew very quickly over the course of that year, but we were figuring everything out as we went along. Even now,
the scale of DSA prior to
crazy. Like in 2016, it was something like 5,000 members. Over the course of 4 years, it shot up beyond 90,000.
Almost 20x members. It's insane.
Totally. And, even to this day, like, I would say our national structure has not kept up to the size of our membership even now. But we've learned a lot. Like, a lot of chapters have really built up really impressive organizing machines. We've gotten like hundreds of people elected as open socialists across the country. Our labor organizing is developed by leaps and bounds to help strengthen the labor movement. There are just all these things that we're capable of now that we weren't 8 years ago. So, a few weeks ago at the inauguration protests, there was a lot of reporting like, oh, the protests are smaller than they were in 2017. And that's true. But I think many thousands of people still showed up across the country. And I think the people who showed up have fewer illusions than they did 8 years ago, like after Democrats have fully squandered the chance to demonstrate a real alternative for working class people. Like what I saw, like I was at the protests in DC that weekend last month. And like for one thing, DSA was a much bigger presence, like very visibly. Like there were hundreds of us there. We were handing out literature. Like there were people with the pink pussy hats, like taking signs that we had that said "Socialism beats fascism," and there was just a much more widespread sense that okay, we need to organize. We can't just like show up and expect people to hear the truth and then vote differently in 2 years, which I think was the case in 2017. Like I remember week after week being at those big rallies in 2017, and almost all of them ended with, and then turn out to vote, in 4 years or in 2 years. And that's part of what helped, kind of radicalize a lot of us in DSA. We were just like, all right, we know that's not enough. It didn't work this time. We need to organize in very concrete ways and figure out what that means. So I think now what I'm hearing from DSA chapters across the country is that there is, like, we're having another big membership bump. People are joining DSA because they want to know what to do. They want to do something. And DSA is an organization that is, pretty well able to plug people into stuff now. Like you can, in most major cities in this country at this point, or even smaller to mid-sized towns, you can show up to a DSA meeting and, or an intro to DSA meeting and just hear about like, okay, these are a few organizing campaigns. These are things that we're doing like in this community where you can, you can understand like what the goals are. Like we're organizing around, whatever it is for like migrant rights, for trans rights, for public power, for, just different things. We're organizing to build up the labor movement locally by supporting these workers in these workplaces. We're trying to get somebody elected based on this platform that you can very clearly understand and you can reasonably trust more than you could with, some random Democrat, like when they're running for this set of things. Like we can count on them to actually fight for it because we as an organization are going to hold them accountable. And we're the reason that they're able to do this. So there are all these exciting campaigns, like the highest profile one right now probably is Zoran Mamdani running for mayor of New York City against Eric Adams, who's just like comically corrupt.
Like absolutely like held at gunpoint at this point by the Trump administration. And also like you see somebody like Zoran, he's getting like actual momentum. And I got to tell you, the campaign has been pretty genius in how they've been out there and how they've been showing they've been in the community and listening to people.
Yeah, and these are the things that give me hope, that I think give a lot of DSA members hope right now. Like we see what Trump is doing, just these very like tyrannical moves, these like naked power grabs that are rightfully causing so much outrage. That just looking at that alone is really depressing and demoralizing because they're just doing it and like nobody who we would think has any power to stop it is doing that. But I think through being in DSA, like through like traveling around the country, like meeting with a lot of chapters as co-chair of DSA, I'm hearing like in conversations with people who are active in DSA, like people want fighters right now. They want people who will fight for them, like for their coworkers, for their families, for their friends, for their communities. Like that is what has been missing from Democrats for years. Like when during the presidential campaign, like Trump would put out these ads that are like Kamala is for they, them, and it just has a terrifying image of Kamala with some like trans and non-binary people. And Democrats, what do they do as an alternative? She's just like, oh, well, I'm just going to follow the law regarding trans people. But like, no, like talk about how, everybody belongs in our society. Just have some inclusive message, like something, like actually.
You can't even do the liberal stuff anymore.
Right. And that's what, like, historically, in the past few decades, liberals have at least, talked about minority rights, like, human rights, whatever, but they can't even do that. So I think that's why, like right now, DSA has so many trans members because, like, first of all, a lot of trans people who are working class people realize, like, what's the biggest threat to my livelihood? It's not necessarily that, I just want respect and like representation in media. It's like, no, I'm discriminated against at work. or in housing, or like my access to healthcare. And that sucks. That's terrible. And what are the actual solutions to that? They're universal things, like actually having socialized housing, and not just like my rent prices going up so that I'm more beholden to whatever terrible landlord might treat me some kind of way, or like my access to healthcare depending on my current job situation, or my parents who might not approve of my lifestyle. It's like actually universal healthcare, Medicare for all is what would help me in that situation. So just all these things.
Infrastructure, for example, public infrastructure is on my mind because
Totally.
we just lost power for 12 hours yesterday.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people of marginalized identities, like working class people, realize that the solutions to their biggest problems are things that help all working class people.
Yes.
And I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to DSA right now. And like for example, just talking about trans rights again. One of the something I heard from, I think, a Starbucks organizer in the South who was talking about one of the biggest trans rights organizations right now in the U.S. is the Starbucks Workers Union.
Yes.
Because there are so many queer and trans members who are workers, like fighting for their rights together, and like part of what they're fighting for is just basic dignity at work. So that also counters the perspective sometimes of like workers, like people in labor unions in this country being like burly white men in factories, like the white working class, whatever. It's like, no, actually the working class is all kinds of people. And like some of these people who have like pink hair and piercings or whatever, and like are gender non-conforming, are also workers. And their rights are very intertwined with all workers. So I think as socialists, we're able to bring a lot of these things together and just understand how all of our struggles are interconnected. And that's just part of that's an example of how, like, why DSA is growing right now, because our members are, we're not single issue people. We understand that all of these things are connected to the working class coming together as a force and building our power together to transform our entire society so that it runs for the many and not just a few people who profit from dividing people and keeping people divided.
You are listening to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. Jeff and Ashik Siddique talking about basically the fight back to Trump and DSA and sort of things in that realm. I'm glad you brought up the Starbucks campaign, and specifically how it's sort of like changing the image of unions in the country. I mean, like anybody who's had any amount of time, like actually working with like union members, like they run a very similar gamut. There might be more of these sort of like outwardly like queer, non-binary, blue-haired, whatever's in there. But if you don't know somebody who's like queer in the trades in your city or whatever, it's like, have you really gone to a meeting? Like, seriously? Like this is something that definitely does exist. It's just like one of those sorts of things that like it's actually potentially changing that image, I guess you could say, publicly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's another big difference from 8 years ago. Like I remember when I first joined DSA in the first year or two, there was a lot of anxiety around using pronouns, like having introductions at meetings and normalizing the use of your pronouns. There was initially, discomfort around that, just like, oh, is this just like a culture war thing, or are we alienating normal people, like normal workers? And then, over time, it just, people got used to it, first of all, and also, on various sides, like both, people who were actually uncomfortable with it, kind of just through enough conversations, it was like, look, this is just a basic respect thing. It's not such a huge deal. But then also on the other end, I would say like the kind of, like there's been a lot of identity discourse over the years, and, like a trend that I would call maybe like identity essentialist. Well, just like really emphasizing identity as a primary factor in your experience of the world. I think that also kind of accommodated a bit to understand like, okay, yeah, there are people who are just kind of used to existing and talking in certain ways, and like maybe we can grant a little bit of grace, but also just collectively affirm the norms that we think are most inclusive and like helps us build the kind of collective organization we need. So that's where like there were enough conversations that I remember from initially there were people who, like if somebody, once or twice or three times would get the pronouns wrong or something, just like initially being, very harsh on that person. But then also just through the kind of collective normalization, just being like, okay, look, you can forgive somebody like once or twice or three times, but like just keep gently reaffirming, like setting norms that way.
Also, when somebody's doing it as a purpose and it's like a dig too, like sometimes you can be like do honest mistakes or whatever, and sometimes you can be an a-hole about it, and you have to have some kind of like discretion in determining what the difference is.
Totally. So yeah, like all that to say, I just remember like there being like a ton of anxiety, like in my chapter in DC, like for a while, but then eventually it was, like I remember somebody who in the beginning was like a little bit, hostile or like resisted using the
part of the culture. It becomes a part of the culture.
And then years later, like that same person I've seen like be, one of the biggest defenders.
Yeah, exactly.
When people are being disrespectful. So all that to say, like, part of collective organization is helping people work through these issues over time and like not treating anybody as disposable. And that's something that, just to get into a whole other realm of like what feels different now. I think there is a growing sense across DSA and the broader left that sometimes the way, like when the stakes are so high against like the people in power now want to destroy all of us and everything we stand for. So maybe that means being a little bit more forgiving about some of the kind of like internal left conflicts that can have been pretty intense sometimes and like can be very intense because, we all want to change the world and sometimes we have divergent ideas about how to do that. And those conflicts, those debates can play out in ways that can be important to resolve. But especially in this period, I'm just hearing from a lot of people that, okay, maybe some of these things that we've been fighting about for the past few years, we can kind of put more on the back burner or even consider them resolved in some ways because of what our collective enemy is doing.
Or simply work through them in more constructive ways.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just, the desire for the left, not just to be like a subculture, like we're not just here to make friends and hang out and like talk about Marx sometimes, although I'm a big proponent of political education. Like it was definitely very important for me to like read a lot of the texts and talk about them with people. But in very short order, like as we were reading Marx and like Gramsci and like, all these great thinkers of the past, we were also like, okay, we have to do things. So actually the first year that I was involved in DSA, our chapter had a lot of protracted fights about, it felt like we were having to figure out how to out-organize the people who'd been there for a while, who kind of just did want it to be a reading group, or just like threatened by the idea that we would come in and change everything and whatever. But just the stakes were so high that we really felt, we really took to heart the idea that it's not just enough to interpret the world, we have to change it. Like that's very basic. Like Marx
you did read Marx.
yeah, I learned at least that much. Like that's a quote I use a lot. But it's real. It's like as we're learning and debating things, we have to always be organizing in ways that are bringing more people into this. So I think in this period, like with DSA growing so quickly, I think what I'm hearing from a lot of chapters, especially if people have been in the mode of kind of just mostly having like social events or reading groups, political education, there's a lot of new energy coming in, and it's really putting the burden on people to figure out like what we're actually doing in this period because the stakes are so high. Like there's a really widespread desire to get our act together and really show what we're doing in the world, because somebody has to show what the alternative is to the system right now.
Yeah, and it's so important. And you mentioned we talked for a few minutes about the labor side of things. That's sort of like one of our priorities. We can talk about that one first, and then we can maybe get into some others. But I know that we have been, for many years, a partner with the Emergency Workers Organizing Committee. We're actually going to be starting one in Richmond very soon.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great to hear. So that's actually, EWOC, the Emergency Workers Organizing Committee, that's a really great example of something that DSA helped build. It started in 2020. I think a few months into the pandemic, there was, one of the big things we saw in those first few months was that emergency workers, like people on the front lines of the crisis, like health workers, like service workers, were being celebrated in the media, just like, oh, thank you for your service, like for the first time in popular discourse in a while, that kind of rhetoric was being used not about, soldiers or police officers, but about, everyday workers who actually are doing like care work. Or
they still make $9 an hour with no benefits.
Totally. Yeah. So all these people who are being celebrated for all these reasons in ways that they deserve, and that should be done all the time, but did not have basic workplace protections. So with the understanding that the labor movement is the weakest that it's been in decades after very systematic attack, like as socialists, we know that we have to rebuild the labor movement. It needs to be way stronger for us to have a strong shot at winning a lot of what we want to win. So EWOC was formed in partnership with the UE electric workers. So that helped. It's expanded a lot in the past 5 years, but the goal is to help workers organize in places where they don't already have a union, to just like organize for their rights, basic workplace protections, and ideally to help form a union. So EWOC has grown really quickly. DSA has helped build a lot of chapters like locals across the country, and that's really exciting. So that's really demonstrably helping build the labor movement. And there's a lot else. So just in the past week, Seattle DSA won a ballot measure for social housing, which is huge.
Oh yeah.
So this is just housing that is like deeply affordable, that is
in Seattle, where cost of living is insane.
Totally. And Seattle's a great example of just like tech billionaires just like totally taking over the economy, and all these companies like Starbucks, what else, Microsoft, like all these huge companies are based in Seattle, and just getting all these tax benefits while siphoning off resources from most people who pay taxes, or just workers who are living there. So this is Seattle DSA is helping reverse that. And that's Seattle DSA has actually really been doing a lot of exciting stuff in recent years. Just in the past year, they helped win the highest minimum wage in the country in Renton, like over $20 an hour. And again, that's a huge contrast from Democrats. Like Biden had as a policy promise in 2020 that he would raise the minimum wage over $7, and he gave up on that within a month or two of his term. So that's just something that should have been a no-brainer, like a layup for Democrats to do that. And I forget what the reasons even were, but they did not fight for that substantially. So DSA is showing like this is an extremely popular thing. Like when you organize to win, like with a ballot measure, most people will support that. And DSA is an organization that really threw down to make that happen. And yeah, there are examples like that all over the country that show like, as a counterpoint to how Democratic turnout is dropping, like even in like very deep blue, like liberal cities that have been part of the Democrat base, DSA is growing there. Like our chapters across the board are growing right now. Just coast to coast. And it's because we're out there clearly doing things that people want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I sort of see these connections kind of all of these issues that we have. I mean, we have as priorities in DSA, eco-socialism, we have labor, and we also have sort of the political, the electoral, I guess, and the governance side of things. And like, it is impossible for any of these priorities to have any kind of motion, to have any kind of push forward without these things. It's a Venn diagram. They're all crossing over in all kinds of like really exciting and interesting ways. Specifically on the electoral front, I mean, unfortunately, the organization has been sort of like, I want to say, fortunately, we've had a lot of success when it comes to running elections and getting victories. But unfortunately, there has been sort of like some high profile sort of like internal battles around some of these figures that DSA has gotten elected. When you look forward in the next sort of couple of years and sort of see just on that front and maybe some of these other fronts that go along with it, what do you sort of see as, I guess, ways to make that as successful as possible?
Yeah, I would say so. In the first years of DSA's growth, like from 2017 to 2020, that's when we were all just, figuring it out as we went along. Like, I think there were a lot of, like, our engagement with electoral campaigns, for example, was broadly, I would say, part of a, progressive, like broader left upsurge. So when we engaged in electoral campaigns, for the most part, it was kind of just like, all right, this person has a good platform. Like, we support this. They supported Bernie, in 2016 or 2020. So that's
always a good sign.
We'll go for it. But I think through doing those campaigns, I think that was really important. Like that period was really critical for developing a lot of the skills in DSA, like our field efforts, like in a lot of our chapters. Through engaging in those campaigns, we showed what the power is of our ground game as DSA, like across the board. Like when DSA chapters threw down, or the national organization threw down for campaigns, that added a huge amount of field capacity to campaigns. And through doing that, I think it built up a lot of chapters' confidence to do more and more on their own. And our national organization has, in fits and starts, gotten better at supporting what it means to run DSA electoral campaigns. And I think right now, like at this point, like 8 years later, since DSA has, grown so much, we have a lot of really good examples of what it looks like to build an independent electoral machine. Like New York City DSA is able to run somebody like Zoran Mamdani for mayor on these huge, like ambitious, like full-throated transformative demands because of, years of experience building up a block in state government, in the New York Assembly and Senate. There's now, I think they just elected their 9th person to state government, and they're able to operate as a block of socialists in office, like we call it our SIO, socialists in office. So they're able to operate as a block to advance demands as DSA, like in partnership with the New York City DSA chapter or New York State chapters. They're advancing an agenda collectively, like not just as a group of individuals who, were trusting to do nice things for us, but it's really a meaningful partnership. And that's why they've been able to fight for and win things like the Build Public Renewables Act, which is the biggest, there's been all this talk of a Green New Deal for years at the national level, and that has totally stalled out at this point. Like we should have no illusions about that right now. But at the local level, we're able to win and actually fight for things independently as DSA. Like this is an effort to build out renewable energy using the public sector, like with labor unions. And historically, there's been a huge divide between the environmental movement and the labor movement, and DSA is helping bridge that gap now to have green demands be driven by unions. So that's, models like that, like winning those at the local level, like there's no permanent win or loss, like when we win things, we have to keep defending and advancing on those fights. But that's what we're doing. Every time we win something, we learn lessons about how to defend that and do it even better. When we lose, we're able to absorb those lessons about what we do better. And now our electoral program all over the country is helping win people who are stronger and stronger at advancing our working class socialist demands because we're stronger and better about it. Like Richmond DSA in Virginia, I was there a few weeks ago, just elected Kenya Gibson to city council.
I love Kenya.
Which is awesome. And, other examples, like in Atlanta, in Georgia, when, as a contrast with Senator Raphael Warnock, who was elected to a lot of fanfare a few years ago, he just voted to pass this like horrible immigration restriction bill, which is a huge affront to civil rights. He talks about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. He has roots in MLK's parish. But, and
somebody who DSA put in no small amount of effort to get elected, you know what I mean?
And as a contrast to that, he's not a socialist. Like he doesn't have like an organization like DSA as part of his base. Atlanta DSA helped replace an incumbent Democrat with a Stop Cop City organizer, Gabriel Sanchez, who fully came up through DSA, who was a leader in Atlanta DSA and is now the first socialist in Georgia state government, I think. So that's a huge difference. And that's in a district that used to be like Newt Gingrich's base, who helped fully reorganize Republicans to the right in the 1990s. So that's actually a great, kind of bookend. Like in my Newsweek article, I talk about how Democrats have been doing the centrist triangulation for decades, like really like the high period of that was Bill Clinton in the 90s, just like really fully leaning into neoliberalism. And that's when Republicans started taking back the government. Like Democrats lost their congressional majority that they had for 40 years in the 90s. And Newt Gingrich was somebody who represented that. So now, like decades later, like DSA is helping shift that in a different direction, hopefully. But yeah, so Gabriel Sanchez is a great example of that. Like Atlanta DSA fully helped elect him using lessons learned from other DSA chapters that elected their, DSA cadre to office. There are examples of this.
Shout out to Gabby Bureau on school board in New Orleans. Shout out to Devontae Lewis, the public service commissioner in Louisiana.
There's so many great examples. Yeah, in Louisville, Kentucky, J.P. Leninger is now on the city council as a DSA member who's fully independent. So just it in the past, like I remember before 2020, say, like I would hear from a lot of people across DSA, like, oh well, it's nice that New York City's doing this, or San Francisco or LA, but those are big liberal coastal cities. Like we could never do it here in the Midwest or in the South or whatever. But we're just proving that wrong. Like we're doing it increasingly everywhere. And, it's a model that works. It's working better and better. And we just have so many examples that show that we are the ones who are ready to fight. Yeah. And that's, it's ridiculous to say, like basically the main thrust of this article I put out is that, responding to criticisms that the resistance against Trump the first time went too far. And now we just need to kind of stand down or calm down and, just be more polite or something, somehow like fight less hard. But
you need to be more polite to Donald Trump, who is the rudest dude ever.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So, they're criticizing the resistance, but I call them the desistants because they're desisting. They're just believing that, they're saying that, somehow Trump won because the left went too far and pushed Democrats too far left. But it's the opposite. It's Democrats did not listen to their base enough. Yeah.
They say that every time. I mean, in 2022, they said it was because of the Black Lives Matter protests that took place then. And, 2020, they said they would have won more gains in the House and Senate if they hadn't, been more of these kind of actions on the ground, fighting for actual, things like there's this very intentional break between movement politics and this sort of like establishment Democrat politics, where there's very, very much an intention to cut them off, misinterpret and villainize all of that stuff, and essentially turn that into this is why you need to vote for us, suburban Panera Bread mom, because we're safe and we're not going to do anything to anybody. We're just not Trump. We're like morally, or not morally, but like we have better etiquette. We have better like manners, and we don't say like rude, nasty things, but we have the same agenda.
Yeah, I just remember like in the weeks leading up to the election, like here in North Carolina, I would see signs on the street, like by the highway, like Trump signs that would be very bluntly like Trump safety, Kamala crime, Trump closed borders, Kamala open borders. And I was like, all right, I hate this, but it's very succinct. It's tapping into like the lizard brain, right-wing values. And what's on the other side? I would see Harris Wall signs that just say, vote for decency.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm sorry, decency is not like a deep value that I hold personally. I would, I don't care about that. I want to see that people are fighting for what I deeply care about and is part of my, feelings of like safety or, just like there's a different set of values that I think are positive values that the left can advance. But Democrats just don't do that. And somebody needs to be doing that if we're going to reorganize against the rise of fascism in this country and the world.
And those are the exact same kind of like weapons that they use against like the left, like against Bernie Sanders, the Bernie bro thing. Remember that? Like, oh, you can't like, sure, I would love Medicare for all, but he's just so loud. You know what I mean?
Right. And it's not even like Bernie wasn't even especially rude or anything, but it's like if he was, I would be like, okay, good. At least he's fighting for something.
So I guess sort of as we wind down for the last couple of minutes, when it comes to the sort of like, I don't know, there is this sort of like very, and I know everybody hates predictions or whatever, but if you could see like what an actual sort of replacement for this like establishment Democrat politics, and you don't need to be that specific, but like what a replacement for these sort of like Democrat establishment politics, how it becomes displaced, and what is the form or what is a potential form that could be taken to replace it. Because I mean, everybody talks about they want a workers' party and things like that. That's fine. That's great. We have a system that is very, very entrenched. What do you sort of like see as potential like ways through that? I guess just sort of like thinking outside the box a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's still like $1 million question. I think now.
How do you solve all of politics? Ashik? I need to answer that right now in 5 minutes.
Somebody who was really formative, like for me as an organizer and for DSA in the past 8 years, has been the great labor organizer Jane McAlevey. who, she wrote this book called No Shortcuts.
R.I.P.
Who passed away last year, but who laid out how to apply a lot of principles that she learned from labor organizing through the 90s and 2000s, and just laying out ways that people can use that, like not just in their workplaces, but in other types of organizing. Like I know in climate organizing that I did and helping build up like DSA's eco-socialist organizing, we took a lot of these lessons to heart that she had about how, there are so many lessons that people should check out. Like just Google No Shortcuts, like look up the Organizing for Power series that Jane McAlevey helped develop. There are just all these things like, okay, people have to organize for win or lose conditions. You have to get very rigorous about, how, like what specific goals you're organizing for and how you organize people into it, and get just really, like count people on lists. Don't just take anything for granted about putting your message out. You have to like get a certain number of people that you will need to win the specific thing, whether it's in an electoral election or a legislative policy for a ballot measure or something, or city council votes that you need for something, or in your labor union, like how many people do you need in your workplace to sign a union card or to sign off on something? If you're a tenant organizer, like how many people will it take to win something against your landlord? Just getting really specific about how we build our power. These are just things that have been formative to what DSA across the board has accomplished in many chapters across the country. We're doing these things. We're getting a lot of people elected. We're getting better and better about how we work with them to, actually push things in office that are going to fight for and win things that we need. It's not just enough to trust that once they're in office, they're going to do the right thing, but we have to keep organizing in ways that back them up when they stand their ground. And we just have to keep doing more and more of that in labor unions. Like United Auto Workers is the best and biggest example in recent years of rank and file workers in the union helped reform it internally. They got Sean Fain elected as a leader of the union. And then because there was new leadership, they were able to fight and be much more militant, much more assertive about what workers wanted. And they helped win these huge contracts.
Biggest contract for the big three ever. Struck all big three at the same time. That is insane.
Totally. That was huge. And that also gave them the confidence and ability to say, like, oh, we're now going to come out for Palestine. We're going to be one of the biggest unions in decades to come out for an anti-militarist, like internationalist demand. They helped organize, 7 major unions to come out for an arms embargo against Israel. And that's a huge development that DSA members helped make happen. Like in those unions, there have been DSA members who've been helping internally work as rank and file members or as staff organizers. And that is what has helped shift the labor movement to get more bold and ambitious and, stand in solidarity with people around the world outside of their own workplaces. So these are things that DSA members have been helping to do over the past few years, and we just have to intensify that. We have to get even stronger about that. So I would say our electoral work and our labor organizing work are just critical, pillars of everything else that we've been able to do, like what we've been able to push for on Palestine or internationalism or, for against the climate crisis or for housing. Like these are really especially possible or more powerful because we're building up these forms of institutional power against the establishment and the labor movement or electorally or otherwise. Like we're functioning more and more like an independent party because of these capacities. So, like I don't know if we'll get to fully break from the Democratic Party in the next 4 years or 8 years or what, or if we can run for someone for president like Bernie Sanders did in 2028. I don't have the answers to that now, but I just know that the ways that we're building already is what is going to make anything possible in the future. And we just have to double down on that and get even better. And we're doing it better than anyone else is.
Yeah. Well, Ashik, where can people find you and where can people find more information about DSA?
Sure. Well, you can find me on all the big social media platforms at Ashik, AHSHEEK. Look up DSA, dsausa.org to see what we're doing. You can look up a chapter near you and figure out how to plug in. There are all sorts of ways to organize. And I can plug my latest article. Just Google my name and Newsweek, I guess.
I'll put it in the podcast show notes.
Yeah. the anti-Trump resistance didn't go too far. It didn't go far enough.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Ashik. Really appreciate you. Welcome back anytime. You are listening to WHIV-LP New Orleans. This is Good Morning, Comrade. We love you. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Hold up on